introduction to dancing in heels. Okay, so why are we running this workshop / course? We're finding that we're struggling to carry out the routines and the movements we want, and we're not quite sure why, okay? And quite often it's because of the footwear. So what I thought I would do is put an introduction to heels into the mix, so that firstly we can talk about the footwear itself, okay, and what footwear you might need for different stages. And then what we're going to do is a beginner-friendly routine using the heels, okay? So we're going to do a routine to Lose Control by Kelly Harrison. We're sort of leading you up to what a full-on heel workshop or a heels routine would look like, okay? Because once you start going down the route of heel routines and heel workshops, it's a lot of floor work, yeah? It's a lot of grinding, a lot of floor work, a lot of leg waving. Your arms don't really do too much other than sort of, look after your body. So your footwork is really essential, and your knee bearing is really essential, okay? Because you are spending quite a lot of time on the floor. So, let's look at the footwork, shall we? Now, when you're doing a beginner-friendly burlesque class or other dance class, generally, as long as it's not too crazy and the movements aren't too fast, or there's not too much up, down, you can get away with most heels, all right? And most heels is usually what we might wear on a night out. So, here are just two random pairs of shoes that I might wear on a night out, yeah? So I've got my typical, sandal heel, and then I've got my typical dressing up heel, okay? Now, both of these are good heels, yeah? I can go out and, have a bit of a disco and dance the night away in these all night long. But if I tried to do a dancing heels routine or workshop, these would not last me even 2 minutes, okay? So, firstly, what we have to look at is the flexibility within the shoe. Okay, so I'm just going to show you these. Here, I've got very little flexibility. Obviously, my feet can move on the top part, yeah, but I've got very little movement underneath here. And then I've got this one, again, yeah, very little movement underneath. Obviously, this is a bit softer on top, but I've got no movement underneath, okay? So these are very good shoes for, discoing and partying the night away, but not for the sort of work we need them for. So the question is why? Well, when you do dancing in heels, remember what I said to you, you're going to be doing a lot of getting down on the floor, okay? A lot of up, down, up, down, up, down. So what does that mean your foot needs to be able to do? Literally bend itself almost in half. So if I'm trying to get down on the floor with these and I'm trying to push my, my leg into my toe, I haven't got that flexibility to do that with this, okay? So what I need is a proper dance shoe that can literally fold into itself, yeah? So these are leather, solid made shoes. But with dance shoes, and I appreciate you're not going to be able to appreciate this through the camera, but if I was to let you feel this shoe, what you would feel is, this is all fabric, yeah? It's reinforced fabric, but there's no leather in here, yeah? So the soles of a proper dancing shoe usually come with like a velvet base, yeah? And what that does is that allows my grip to be just right, a nice happy medium, so that I'm not slipping too much on flooring, okay? But at the same time, I am in a position where I can twist and turn and freely move without getting stuck, which is what would happen with a shoe that's got quite a good sole, especially a fresh sole on it. Once the sole's been worn a little and it's a little bit smoother, that might not be the case, yeah, but they're kind of designed so that we don't slip too much. So that's the difference in the shoes, yeah. We need to be able to literally fold our ankles over our toes. And if we was to try and do it in the leather shoes, in the non-dance shoes, what we'd end up doing is snapping, yeah? We would snap it across here. And then you've wasted a perfectly pair of good shoes, okay? Now, what also is really, really good about proper dancing shoes is most companies will allow you to get your heel size made to order. Now these are 2.5 inches. So it's 2.5 inches on the inside, okay? And you know, when you're learning to dance in heels, if you wouldn't consider yourself very good at dancing in heels or a little bit unstable, I would go with something that's 2 to 2.5 inches as a starting point, and then work your way up to 3.5 inches after that, okay? So we've spoken about, you know, the fold and the fabric. And what you will find with these dance shoes, like I said, again, I appreciate you won't be able to, you know, see this for yourself through the camera, but these are all really spongy and soft on the inside. And that's the difference, again, with not having proper leather, right? So, we've gone through the bottom, yeah, us needing that velvet fabric on the bottom. We've gone through the necessity of how the sole and base is made, because we need that bend to happen, okay? And we've talked about the heel as well. And the other thing it's worth mentioning is, again, as well as being able to, you know, request the heel size, you can usually put a request in for the width as well. So you can have something a little bit thinner, you can have something a little bit wider. If it's a good, reputable dance company, you will be able to do all of this. And it doesn't actually cost the earth, yeah? These are usually made to order because they get quite a few orders in. So, next we need to talk about the top of the shoe or boot, okay? And also the fabric. So, another reason why something like this, let's just imagine this was a little bit more flexible, okay? Or let's imagine this was a Latin dance shoe. Because with Latin dance shoes, they do come in like a sandal format. So they come sort of like looking like a normal shoe without the boot up the ankle, and they can look quite pretty. Okay, and they will have the velvet on the bottom, and they will be able to literally bend in half. But they'll be quite strappy on the top. Now they are brilliant for Latin classes, but again, these aren't any good for heel classes and heel workshops. Why? The protection of the top of the foot and the toes. Again, if you're imagining that you're dancing and you're constantly doing this, you're flicking your feet over on top of each other and back again, what's going to happen is you're going to scrape all your toes. You're going to bruise and damage the top part of the foot, yeah? And believe me, you will. You really, really will. Especially this part up here, you think, how am I going to get that bit? Maybe my toes, but I promise you now, you will scrape your foot, okay? When you're doing these types of heel routines and these heel workshops, you can have the front of the toe uncovered, because these are some of my shoes that I use for my heel workshops, okay? So you can have some space, some breathable space, and you can have it so that the big toe comes out the front. But what you don't want is to have half of the foot hanging out the front, and you don't want the top of the foot exposed, because you're just going to scrape the life out of it all, okay? So even the pretty Latin shoes would not be suitable for a proper heels class and a proper heels workshop. What's more, you need your ankle protection, okay? So, let's go back to these. In fact, before we do, let's look at these. So these are Latin shoes, okay? But these aren't the strappy ones, these are ballroom Latin, okay? So again, I don't know if you can see that through the camera. It's got the velvet on. The heel was made to order at 2.5 inches, okay? So was the width. They can bend literally onto each other, maybe quite not as flexible because they have got the leather bit on the top, but the bottom is slightly softer so that it can bend closer in, all right? But what you find is the point where the toe is closed and the fact that the top is exposed would still cause damage to the foot, okay? So pointy shoes, pointy closed shoes, if this type where the top is still exposed, you could actually find the toes start to get sore, they start to pinch, yeah? So Latin ballroom shoes, okay, whilst they are covering the toe, you've still got this bit exposed, you've got very little ankle support, okay? And chances are, because they go slim here, that you are going to start to feel the toes rub, okay? Now guys, you may be thinking, this girl doesn't know what she's talking about, but go and watch the videos yourself, yeah? Go on YouTube, go on, oh my God, Instagram, look at Reels, and look closely at their feet. Most of them are wearing a dance boot, but what a lot of them do is put a leg warmer on. Because what can happen is these can flap around, not flap around, but you'll have a gap around the ankle. So whereas a nice strappy shoe looks fitted to the foot, these won't look fitted to the ankle. You will see that there's a tiny gap, yeah, when you're dancing. And for those of us that are sort of tuned in with our eyes, we notice that when we're looking back at our videos. So we chuck a leg warmer on, either over the foot and up the leg and ruffle it down the ankle, yeah? Or we just put some on that can sit around the ankle anyway. So what you will see if you go and watch these videos is a lot of them have a proper dance boot, yeah? So remember, you need the softness, you need the correct bottom, but you need your ankle support as well. You are doing so much bending, yeah, back and forth, that you need that support there, just as equally, okay? You need it at the sides, so you don't twist the ankle, yeah? And I'm not saying you'll never do it, but it just reduces the risk. Because remember, we're always about, you know, prevention's better than cure. So you'll see with this boot, that yes, I've got my breathing holes so that my foot can breathe, and I've got a small space here for my sort of big toe and just about my second toe. But this boot here is not made with leather, it's made with like a breathing mesh, okay? So again, I don't know if you can appreciate that through the screen, but you can see my hand through. So my foot can breathe. I've got bits of protection across the front so that when I am down here, I'm not going to be constantly scraping the front of my foot, yeah? But also, with your footwear, when you're dancing quite heavily with them, I always recommend going half a size up. And again, dance companies are really good at providing half sizes. So I'm usually a 5, but these are a 5.5. Because as you know, when you dance, your foot swells. And the last thing you want is your circulation being cut off, you know, your shoe digging into you. Because then dancing becomes unpleasant, doesn't it? And then you've got to stop, you've got to give yourself a break. So I usually recommend going half a size up for your dance shoes, all right? But with the mesh ones, like I say, the foot can breathe. And you can get these in pretty versions. The company that I got these off of, they actually had another pair where the diamantes were all across the crisscrosses, yeah? But these are what I call my, you know, hardcore pair. So I didn't want diamantes on there because I knew that with all the sort of dragging on the floor that I do, the diamantes would probably flick off in no time. So, you know, you can get blinged up ones, they don't look quite so plain. You just have to do the research and find the right companies. But Again, once my foot is in, my big toe would be here, and then you might just start to see my next toe. So my big toe's got room to breathe, but the mesh as well allows movement in the shoe, yeah? It allows my foot to move around without too much restriction, but it still supports me and it allows my foot to breathe. When it's done up, yeah, my ankle is nicely supported, but it's supported in a way where it can move. Yeah, I've got lots of bend in that. You can see it bends right over, so I've got lots of movement, but I'm being supported where I need to be supported. Okay, so your footwork, so your heels and your footwear are really, really important once you want to start leveling up or looking at, you know, a bit more hardcore floor work stuff. Okay. The last thing I want to talk to you about is straps or laces, yeah? So with particularly shoes like this, yeah, so dancing boots, what you can often see is companies will have them where they sort of, there is some fabric, but there'll be laces going up. Now they are fine, yeah, depending how much coverage you want on the front of your foot here, they are fine, but what issue might we have with laces that are particularly on the front of the ankle? Catching, yeah? When we're dancing, the chances of that heel catching in that lace, whether we're standing, we're on the floor flicking our feet round, we don't want to take that chance. Remember, prevention is better than cure, yeah? So we don't want to take that chance. So I personally try to avoid a shoe with laces. I just go for a nice, simple zip. However, if you are going to use shoes with laces, try and get some where you can either, they're long enough that you can then tie it up at the back and then tuck it into your shoe, yeah? Or tie it up round the front, but then make sure that you can find a way to sort of secure the lace without the loop. Yeah, so secure the lace without the loop and then tuck it again in the boot so that you're not uncomfortable. Obviously, you've got to see what works for you. You've got to have a play around with it. You've got to play around with the, you know, the chosen footwear that you've opted for. But ultimately, I would avoid laces, okay? So lastly, I want to speak to you about longer boots, okay? Particularly pole boots. Now, what you will see is a lot of polers doing a lot of floor work, and they obviously have the very thick stilettos, pleasers, all that sort of thing. But they do come up usually and cover the knees. I know there are some ankle ones, and there are some ones that cover the knees. But what I'm particularly looking at is the actual base of it itself, okay? So unfortunately, I don't have a pair with me to show you. But what you will see is with the pole shoes, they are usually made of leather on the underneath. So what they won't have, yeah, is they won't have that bend in them. But what they do have is a very, very thick wedge underneath, and then they're usually angled in. And that is so that, you know, imagine this has got the big thick wedge underneath, but the reason why they are slanted in is so that polers can roll onto the toe without bending and damaging the boot or the shoe, yeah? So they'll be dancing, they might be sort of, you know, standing upright whilst they're doing their pole work, and then when they're down on the knees or down on the floor, by tipping onto their toes, what's happening is they're actually balancing on that thick wedge that's slanted, okay? So, actually pole boots, as long as the foot is fully covered and you've got that ankle support, whether they're sort of ankle high or knee high, okay, they will be suitable because they must have that thick wedge underneath and it must be slightly slanted in, and that's what allows you to do that roll onto the toe, okay? So, pole boots are absolutely fine. Just watch them laces again. If you've got laces with them, find a way to tuck the laces away. It's better to be safe than sorry. And then obviously again, you've got dancing boots, yeah? So again, you can get your hands on dancing boots. So if you're somebody like me that would prefer not to have knee pads on, just because it's nicer to have, you know, the footwear covering your knee rather than a separate knee pad on, it looks more dancey to me, then you can get yourself a pair of dancing boots, all right? So by me having dancing boots, it means that I don't have to worry about leg warmers with that gap that comes around the ankle, and I don't have to worry about knee pads for covering my knees when I'm down on the floor, okay? So with your boots, again, I can come right down, yeah, and I can bend my feet right in, and I've got lots of flexibility here in my foot. But then when I drop to my knees are also covered, okay? Because we do need that bit of protection, especially if we're doing it quite regularly, okay? So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you something to think about for your footwork, okay, and how important it is. And really that your footwear itself can determine you taking yourself to the next level, and how well you can kind of perform in those heels. All right. If you have any questions about that, or you've got some shoes you wouldn't mind a bit of advice about, please don't hesitate to pop us in a message. And if we can help, we will certainly try. And if not, we might know somebody that can better help. Okay. So. And don't forget, guys, leg warmers, really, really good for, you know, heel routines and heel workshops, because firstly, if you get a nice long pair, you can cover your knees as well with them. But secondly, the way that they're designed, if you want them to be, obviously you can get some with just the, you know, usual open at the bottom. But if you want to get some proper heel leg warmers, some dancing leg warmers, you've got a gap at the back there for your actual heel of your footwear, okay? And then your toe would go through there, and it would cover sort of from, you know, the top of the foot there, and it would cover down to the heel, up through the leg, almost as if you've got a pair of over-knee boots. But like I say, again, leg warmers can come in all sorts of lengths and variations, so you just need to pick a pair that's right for you, okay? So there you go, that's our little introduction and talk on the footwear itself. What I'm now going to do is, for those that want to, is take you through a bit of a beginner-friendly heels routine, okay? So like I said, we're going to do it to Kelly Harrison's Lose Control. We're going to be doing some of it standing, so you can kind of get used to your balance on those heels. And then we're going to do some floor work, okay, and bring ourselves back up again. So, when you're ready, come and join me.